Rosana want to share her thought here. Rosana, feel free to share.
And I'd like only
Oh, hello.
Hello, Frank. Hello, everybody. I'm very sorry I couldn't join you earlier because I was giving class. And so I'm very worried because here in Brazil, we are once again being attacked in the universities, no? And I increasingly feel the absence of dialogue among researchers, no? Once again, the response that emerges tends to hypervalorize the defense of the science. But what kind of the science? The positivist one, no? And so I think that our reaction for the ultra-right, far-right attacks is so wrong in this moment. No, we continue to say, no, we need to be more scientists, we need more science. What we are doing is pro-science, but what kind of science? In this sense, I think that I'd like to agree with Jennifer, because I think that we need to create more space for dialogue between among democratic experience of teaching, of learning, of make a social projects, because the far right, they are very expert in doing this right now. No, they have a global organization, I could say. No, they can spread their values, they can spread their ideas in a very fast and efficacious way. But in the other part of the world, the even smaller democratic world, we cannot do this, even because we have a lot of ethical problems now to use the same instruments. And so I'm sure that we need to create spaces for dialogue between democratic experience. But I'm not sure if, and I'm one of the editors of the CPS, I'm not sure if the academic journals are the best space in this moment for, it's one of the space, and it's very necessary. But I think that we need more. You know, I think that we need to create other kind of space for debates, for sharing experience, to do together more things,
Right.
you know.
But well, I think you touch on a really important point, and that is the university. The universities that I know are dead. There's nothing going on of interest. We have students, but we teach them boring methodological techniques, and that's it. There's no political discussion. Part of this is a fear of what's going on outside. Look at the recent story about Columbia University bowed to Trump because he took away the money. He put the Middle East Department in receivership to control what they teach. So I still say we need to hope for, we don't need to wait, but we can have spaces. But my worry is that we will be talking to each other in these spaces. We need ordinary people to come to these spaces. Otherwise, we're talking to ourselves.
Well, I think, Frank, I think talking to ourselves is fine. I think we need to do a little bit more of that.
I agree.
And sort of maybe get a consensus. I mean, this is in a way, this particular forum we're having right now that you organized is an example of what we need to do and talk to each other. Now, for example, on Social Security, I don't think Social Security is going to go by the wayside this summer. I think there's too much political resistance. In fact, anytime any of these Republicans even hints at it, they get busted. So it's a negative to talk about Social Security among Republicans, but that's just a side point. I think the main point is that I think that there's a lot that can be accomplished, not by trying to influence the mainstream political discussion, but talking amongst ourselves and figuring out if there's some kind of consensus or what our points of disagreement are among, say, critical policy analysts or academics.
I agree. I think that's what we have to do. I agree that about our conversation here is an example. My hope is that we could develop a critical policy analysis that can support such a discussion, but at the same time, they are moving forward. A friend of mine has a theory which sounds kind of crazy, but I can't say it's wrong. He thinks that by the summer, there'll be big time demonstrations, some of which will be violent. Tesla is maybe a little hint of that. And that then Trump will call out the army to put it down. And then he'll say, we have to have emergency, what's it called? Emergency.
Martial law.
Martial law, right? And then he'll say we need no elections. So no election in 2026. You can't put it past these people.
Unfortunately, I can see that. He's already hinted at no elections, right?
Yeah.
Huh?
But,
I think that's the last time he's going to run.
In addition to publishing in scholarly journals, I think it's important to both go on social media and to also publish in more popular kinds of media. That is not, I mean, there is this temptation as an academic to always want to improve your H score and thus to publish in scholarly journals, but that is not what influences the larger public.
No. It is pretty much, I would have to agree with Jennifer that we have to become scholar activists. But this means that we have to step out of our pretty comfortable existence and go at some point to the barricade. And I think that will start to come when the situation is developing, but it hasn't come to a head. Are we going to lose Social Security or not? We could lose Social Security just because the computer system could collapse.
That's right.
We don't know. Everything is open. It is a time when people are frightened. People are worried. We had this discussion about whether I need to worry about, as an American, coming back in to the country in a few weeks. Jennifer pointed out quite correctly that as a white male, I'll probably walk right through, but the brown person behind me may well get questioned, although he or she is a citizen. I mean, I found it amazing that I'm actually looking online to see what I might confront at the airport, these have become the new realities, and this requires, they will march ahead unless we get some kind of massive alternative opposition.
Well, instead, what we're seeing are these huge divisions, which are very reminiscent of the communists versus socialists fighting with each other before the rise of Hitler. And that, people are just screaming to each other as to whether Schumer should or should not have voted for the continuing resolution. Well, I mean, it's passed. This is not something to lose time over. And yet it's these kinds of recriminations are much more now what's happening among people who are opposed to the regime than people trying to figure out new strategies or coming together with a program or anything like that. I mean, maybe as academics, what we might work on is a program. And I think that's the point you really made before about Agenda 2025, a comparable program rather than saying, oh, well, it was, Harris's fault, or it was Schumer's fault or whoever's fault it was.
And-
There's an awful lot of fault finding going on.
This is exactly what the sort of thing that we can do. We're not running for office, but this is the kind of thing we can contribute to. That's for sure. I mean, that is our piece of this. And this doesn't preclude looking for these openings, as Jennifer suggests. These are openings through which these kind of ideas might be able to go. But if we don't have any ideas, no ideas are going to go through any openings. Or if we just have a fragmented set of ideas about this or that. I mean, it's quite amazing that we find ourselves defending a system that a few years ago we were very critical of. I mean, Danniel had mentioned the myth of democracy. Well, there's certainly something to that. It's not a democratic system, but now we find ourselves forced with thinking about how to defend democracy. Now that has some rhetorical appeal because most people think we have a democracy. Oh, we would lose it. This could have some traction. But they have rolled over us in a big way. I mean, how many people, several people have said this to me, who thought it would be this bad? It's a valid question.
So I have to go in a few minutes, and I wonder if I can jump in and
Yeah.
say my comments.
You may.
Is that okay? Yeah. So after this conversation, I'm not sure how these are going to go, but it's in the spirit of actually trying to be reflexive about what it is that we normally propose and to be a little bit more clear-eyed about that. So first, I want to just start by thanking Frank so much for his just rich scholarship on these issues and also for really building the critical policy studies community. I've been a tremendous beneficiary of all of your efforts, and I'm really, really grateful for that. And I really appreciate Frank's contributions to bringing out the critical and interpretive work, especially talking about it as a fundamentally normative project that comes from the standpoint of social justice and examines power within the policymaking process. I think those are really critical contributions. One key challenge that he lays out for us is extending critical argumentation and analysis into the policymaking process itself. And he advocates for participatory politics of deliberative policymaking within that. And I think the field is very much on board with that proposal. And I want to say that I am a proponent of deliberative democracy, of deliberative policymaking. It's a very appealing vision for a democratic future, but it also has some serious challenges, especially in the political moment that we're in, and especially in deeply divided societies where we have deeply rooted historical inequalities that are very difficult to overcome. And I think we're in what Gramsci would call an interregnum moment right now, where we're in between the way that things used to be organized. We're in a period of clear disruption, and I'm speaking mostly of the United States, but I don't think these comments are unique to the United States. But we're moving into something else, and we don't know what that's going to look like yet. And so it is a real opportunity for us to have a vision and develop a vision of what that is. So I really appreciate that part of the conversation that we've been having. I want to pose 3 interrelated challenges to deliberative policy making, again, as kind of an inside critic that I think we need to think deeply about. And I think this is not just related to deliberative democracy itself per se, but maybe some of the proposals that we have coming from the left. And we really need to address these questions and take them seriously, I think, in order to meet the demands of the moment that we're facing with democratic backsliding. And again, I'm going to draw on my experiences in the US, but I hope these ideas have some broader appeal. So first, I think deliberative democracy inadequately addresses the strategic level of governance having to do with how institutional power is organized. In many cases, deliberative democracy is a set of isolated experiments that are not connected to institutional power, that are capable of creating fundamental shifts in public policies or expanding beyond localities to build broad-scale changes, such as those that we need to address things like climate change and other grand challenges. Obviously, there are some exceptions to this. I think Brazil is a very interesting exception where there have been very deep and broad institutionalized changes that are bringing deliberative policy making in that are very much inviting grassroots groups, but those have also faced retraction in some cases and haven't been permanently institutionalized. In the US context, I think these kinds of experiments have fallen far short of the ambition. There have been valiant efforts. For example, in New York City, there have been participatory budgeting exercises that city council members have experimented with, giving their constituencies control over their budgets to make certain decisions. But the kinds of priorities that people identified were outside of the authority of their council members, and there was no concept of how those projects could actually be carried forward and how authorities that did have the ability to address those issues could actually begin to implement those. And so that's just an example. I'm sure there have been other experiments that maybe have been more successful, but there's still this fundamental institutional challenge. And I think the issue becomes especially challenging when we're confronted with a democratic system that's in backslide and that might already be descending into some kind of authoritarianism. So I think deliberative democracy, as we've talked about, can be critically important to enable dialogue about a strategic response to an authoritarian takeover. But I can't imagine that the solution coming out of such a deliberation would be to deliberate more with those who are exercising authoritarian impulses and have authoritarian ambitions. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the limits of deliberation and when is political pressure necessary? And second, this might even be a more controversial point because it touches on issues of efficiency that the right has sort of captured and is sort of bringing about some kind of efficiency with a sledgehammer to our democracy. But we do need to start thinking about the idea that democratic backsliding might be happening because we're too mired in process to address people's problems efficiently and effectively. And thus people are looking for someone who will get up and just get it done, so to speak. So while I think process can help us address major challenges by opening up new lines of action and engaging a broader public and all of the positive things that we've talked about, it can also slow things down. So Ezra Klein is a journalist and public intellectual in the US who's recently argued this point, using the example of the failure of California to build a speed rail system between Los Angeles and San Francisco. This was a major climate change project because it would greatly reduce the amount of fossil fueled powered vehicles that were on the road and in use. But the process got mired in environmental review and consultation processes, and it started in 2012 and it's still not finished today, more than 12 years later. And that project has not gotten done. There are some pieces of this project that are built in some communities, but they're laying there without being attached to other parts of a rail system. And so these massive delays have also increased the projected cost of this project by, I don't know, millions and billions of dollars. I don't have the figures with me right now, but you can catch them in his new book that's called Abundance. And he says this is worrisome because he's coming from the left and believes that government plays a huge role in addressing social problems. But he says something like, we're caught between a right that wants to destroy government and a left that can't make government work. And so I want to share a contrasting story that I think is quite interesting, which is that in New York, environmental activists quietly passed a law to remove some of the processes that would allow local communities to reject wind and solar projects in the United States, in New York, because they would get in the way of meeting the ambitious climate goals that were passed in a 2019 law that would expand renewable energy projects across the state. And now the state is developing wind and solar farms at a very fast rate, and local communities are still consulted on how those projects would be carried forward, but they're not allowed to reject them outright. I was originally against this project because it sounded anti-democratic, but I think we have to be really clear-eyed about what are some of our fundamental challenges that we need to be addressed, and maybe thinking about how we can actually make government work better and be more efficient, and maybe we need to cut back on process. And so I think we have to think about that because this action to pass this law was strategic on the point of these environmental activists. Which brings me to a third challenge that I want to raise about these types of processes, which is that deliberative democracy can elide questions of power and sees strategy as suspect. Indeed, we need a clear sense of power and how to use it within the context of deliberative democracy. So Mark Swilling is a distinguished professor of sustainable development, and he's expressed some mystification that many scholars interested in sustainable transitions point to dialogue as the solution without a clear sense of a theory of change. He says, and I'm quoting here, while there's nothing wrong with most kinds of dialogue per se, what seems to be lacking is a theory of change that can be used to assess the efficacy of any given set of dialogues as they ideally express themselves in action. And so to me, this centers the idea of strategy and opens a bit of a paradox for deliberative democracy and maybe even critical policy studies about how do you dialogue in ways that help to generate certain policy outcomes. I think people do this all the time when they do deliberation. They don't just do it and actually allow any kind of outcome to happen. There are ways of organizing things to move in a different direction, and that can be strategic, right? So I think in practice, we work with these sort of tensions much more directly than it is easy to articulate those in theoretical perspectives. But when you introduce the idea of a theory of change into dialogue and deliberation, you also introduce the idea of power and how to shift power in order to bring about a specific social change vision. This starts to merge deliberation with advocacy and activism. And so it brings me to my second point, which is what form should deliberative democracy take if it has these fundamental tensions? And for me, it needs to be deliberative activism, particularly in adversarial contexts like we have in the US, maybe not so much in other places where there's a more collaborative kind of political culture. But I think we can't also end there. We also need direct action. But I'm going to say a few words about what I mean by deliberative activism and why I think it's important. So, for example, my early research documented the deliberative activism of environmental justice activists in New Mexico. They deliberated within the New Mexico Environment Department to create environmental justice policies in the state. They also, though, used pressure tactics to ensure that deliberations resulted in real changes in solid waste permitting practices in their communities, which had been allowing outsized pollution in specific communities that were experiencing serious environmental harms, high cancer rates, and so on. And they wanted to also eliminate excessive environmental burdens for these communities. They also created new processes in government that would give a voice to environmental justice communities in environmental policy making. So there was this addition of policy process or layer of process that was added there. So I think these are subtle tensions that we need to work through, not necessarily eliminate process, but really think about what it does to the political process and the ability for governments to actually take action and address people's problems. So activists are generally skeptical of deliberation unless government leaders either demonstrate, not just promise, that deliberation will be fair and just and will generate outcomes that actually improve people's lives, or they're compelled to do so by direct action and pressure tactics. So I think deliberative activism is an important approach, deliberation that holds interlocutors accountable to the less powerful, to listen and to act in their interest. So deliberative democracy needs to be backed by power and a theory of change. So this is not an argument against deliberative policymaking, against interpretive work that people might do collectively together, but it is an attempt to open a discussion about what it needs to look like and how it needs to be linked to power and action in order to deliver and to meet the challenges of our current democratic moment. So I will leave it there, and I hope this helps us advance the conversation.
Well, I would just like to support one point in particular, and that is that while deliberative democracy had its moment, it is unfortunate that it managed to capture political theory because it's only one aspect of politics, of political action. And this has done a lot of damage to political theory work, I would say, to have captured this when we are exactly in a moment where we need deliberative democracy is not the solution. we could talk about deliberative action. That is a move in a more promising direction. Anyway, thank you.
Susan, you want to
Okay.
be the next one?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say that I think the critique of positivism that Frank has for many years proposed is absolutely correct. And I will just give one example of the way in which it incorporates a normative vision without saying it. So in my department in the Harvard Graduate School of Design, there's a course called, the economics course is called Markets and Market Failures. And the assumption, of course, is that markets are the norm and that you should only intervene with government action, with planning, when markets are failing, whatever that means. And usually what it means is that externalities that need to be captured are not captured. So then the move is to try to figure out some way to put those externalities into the market. So that you make polluters pay, for example. You simply make it more costly to be a polluter rather than changing the whole environmental system to make it more, well, to make it less polluting, to make it environmentally better rather than these marginal minor approaches. So that there's no question that positivism, which clearly dominates within political science, incorporates this kind of normative view of the market being the right way to deal with anything. However, I want to note that although my doctorate is in political science, I've always taught in the planning department, and that although quantitative analysis is always part of it, especially in transportation planning, because planners actually have to say what should be done, they are much less inclined to simply use positivist analysis. To go to Jennifer's points, which I agree with, that the problem with proposing deliberation is that works okay when you're among people who share the same set of values. But when you have people who are simply deeply opposed, let's say landlords and tenants, capitalists and proletarians, however you want to define it, that coming to agreement through deliberation is simply not going to happen, as is exemplified now with what's going on in the United States, but also more broadly that there's been a move within Europe against the welfare state, against social democracy in terms of, for example, privatizing housing, which started out with Margaret Thatcher's right to buy, which then benefited a particular group of people who took advantage of it and then don't particularly want their tax money to go build more social housing. And that the Netherlands, which I've studied a lot, that they've moved very much away from their original model of social housing. And I'm not sure that deliberation is ever going to overcome this. But what deliberation is good for, and I think that's what Frank today has come out and said, but in some of our discussions in the past, less so, is that among people who do share values, who come into it with a similar set of values, then deliberation on what are the right strategies, what are the goals that they should aim for, such deliberation is useful. If people agree that social justice should be the outcome, then you can use a deliberative process to try to figure out ways to achieve social justice. There's always been within, certainly within planning, but I think in public policy too, a debate between whether you should focus on outcomes or on process. And Frank just commented that it's unfortunate that deliberation has taken over political theory. And what that really means is that the emphasis has been entirely on process rather than on outcomes. and that a way to really sort of weasel out of having a substantive agenda is to say, well, we'll just let people decide instead of saying what it is that they ought to do. So it does come out to be what is to be done as well as how do we go about doing it. Thank you.
Any response, Frank?
Well, I would just say that I feel that it was worth my time here because it generated such an important, interesting and important discussion about where we stand today and how we need to look for alternative approaches.